I could smell it from the doorway. The stench didn't remind me of rotting, it hardly smelled of death. It had this almost metallic texture, and I felt it react in my teeth. What I imagined puss to smell like grouped in large quantities. One of the uniformed officers motioned for me in a way where I knew this would stay with me for a while. "It's not pretty," he said as he raised a mask to his face. The carpet was covered in it, a yellowish-green substance that sloshed on impact. Bile or something as equally as disgusting. So, how did it get here in the main hall? What the fuck even happened here? Have you ever felt like a small piece of you no longer fit? Like a small piece chipped from this greater image. The more you try and take this little chip of stained glass and fit it back in, the more it scrapes against the surrounding pieces, ruining the whole. His office had a dreary atmosphere. Maybe it was the drapes being down. It could be that I hated the books on his shelves, or that I resented not seeing the sun. I sat on his brown leather sofa, fighting the urge to rest my feet. He sat across me in his leather seat, studying my delivery and expressions. "What is the stained glass image of?" he asked as he waited with the patience I detested. "I'm not sure, maybe of a tree branch in a newly formed cocoon." As we approached the study, I noticed the walls were covered in this hardened texture. The door and the gaps between were pretty much the same. More bile filled the threshold to the entrance. The interior was filled with sickening colors, black and red like veins pulsing through with blue lines streaking across. Large masses covered most of every surface in the room. Areas within the room had different degrees of hardening, but most of it was soft, almost like flesh. The interior was like the inside of a wound. I keep having these dreams, like memories of things that have occurred, but not to me. They should almost slot perfectly in place but are completely alien to me. I wonder how much of it is my imagination or yearning for different outcomes. He writes in his notepad silently and then looks up to meet my eyes. "Describe them for me." The first was of this woman I met at a diner. She was skittish and constantly looking over her shoulders. She came to me for a job. I'm a detective, but the way she approached me made it almost seem like I was a PI. Well, it is fiction. I wouldn't try to dissect it too much. Maybe your mind thought you would be happier going at it alone. Maybe. But I doubt my brain would betray me this much. What do you mean? I hate the job already. Why would I reduce myself to doing a worse version of it? The very last thing I need in life are scores of pictures on my computer of cheating spouses. It sounds like your mind is mean to you. That is one way of putting it. So, what do we have so far? I asked as I started inspecting the scab-like surface with the backside of my pen, testing the integrity of the mass and looking for things within or beneath. The respirator on the hazmat suit made it difficult to see. Officer Penn, who stood at the doorway, went through her list. Prelim shows that a call was placed at about 1,300 hours today. A neighbor called frantic about a noise that sounded like a gunshot. According to the neighbor, the fighting went on for a few hours. At first, it was just them being loud, but then it escalated to yelling and screaming. She said she heard items being thrown, then finally one loud final shriek before the gunshot. That's when she called. "We have any names for the victims?" "Nothing yet." There was a sudden sloshing sound that came from behind us. Much of the light in the interior was covered by more of the skin-like texture. "If you're not in hazmat gear you can't be in here," Officer Penn exclaimed. Suddenly she dropped to the floor. "Oh fuck. What is it?" Something just ran past my foot. I saw movement coming from a pile of hardened newspapers in a corner. I inched closer to reach down before I saw its tail. "It's just a fucking mouse." "Sheesh Penn, you've never seen a mouse before. How can it even move in this?" she said as she got up, wiping mucus-like substance from her gloves. At the far end of the study, a figure knelt on both knees. Gun still held firmly in hand. His body had been covered in the texture, like hardened skin. A cocoon made from the same living organism that made up much of the apartment. Yet the cocoon looked like it had burst by his rib cage, like a small creature erupted from it and became anew. The gunshot went through his right lower jaw and out the top of his skull. From how his body had evolved in the environment, you would think his head had turned into a vase. The stream of blood that followed the bullet had hardened in almost a branch-like quality. Like a small tree had emerged from his skull, so what was the job? She placed a manila folder on the table. Inside were dates, names, locations, and then I saw her picture. Whose? Amber. Your missing wife. Yeah. The whole folder was a comprehensive breakdown of known associates and previous locations, all of them for the sake of Amber. So what did she want? She wanted me to prevent her death. Tucked in a small corner of the room between the bedside table and the far opposite wall behind the window was another. It sat holding its legs. Graying hair flowed down its shoulders. The thickness of the material encasing it was so solid and calloused that it could almost pass for resin. As I studied the woman's expression, I could only see what looked like a familiar face, but older, more tired, and fraught. 30 years from what I remember, but I was sure. This woman encased in calloused skin was my wife. She sat in her favorite spot, on the chaise side of the sectional, reading her book. I recognized the leather exterior, and I was overcome with sickness. Why do you bring that stuff home? Isn't this house bleak enough? I believe in this stuff. You don't have to agree with it, Adam, but you should respect it. It's one thing if you had found Jesus or something, but this is Wiccan shit, fucking witchcraft. You really think you should bring that into our home? You look at bodies all day at work, you come home, and all you can see is death. At least I know the difference between the middle and the end. What is that supposed to mean, Amber? Why do you get like this? Is it 'cause you hate your job, or do you hate yourself? Why do you need me to suffer just as much as you? Well, that's the thing, Doc, I don't think this is just a dream. He takes more notes as a sliver of sun escapes through the cracks. What makes you say that? 'Cause I have them now. All of it, at the same time. Explain it to me then, I said as I sat down as close to her as she was willing to accept. Amber placed the dark leather book on the other side of her as she repositioned herself to face me. You don't really want to know. No, seriously I do. I want to understand. My beliefs are different from what other people who study this are, so don't try to hold me to some standard or anything. That's fine, I just want to understand what draws you to this. It's hard to put into words. It's like there's an intersection where faith, science, and magic all meet. It's time. Time doesn't exist as past, present, or future. Just how we have learned to perceive things through our limited understanding. It happens all at once. Hey Bishop, looks like we got a name, Officer Penn announced. I stood up and away from Amber's cocoon. The apartment is under the name Amber Bingham. No record of a second tenant though. I looked over, and on the desk with a layer of dried blood and pus surrounding it was one of Amber's journals. I recognized it immediately from the color of the pages and the font in the texts. Most of what I had seen before were in these sort of runes I couldn't read. On the right-hand page was a sticky note that read, "Read this passage out loud, Adam. It'll all make sense, I promise." As I started to read aloud, Officer Penn tried to interrupt and grab my attention, but I couldn't stop. Somewhere in my mind, I knew that this had already happened. This was always the beginning. As the final words of unintelligible gibberish left my lips, everything went black. I had been adopted and then became one with it. A considerable amount of time had passed, and I could see 4 lights. All of us were born of the same mass. The same decay and death. And as we pushed together, the cocoon burst. And past that hardened shell, we navigated the remains of a festering wound out past its body and into the wider world. Each of us a thing fluttering to our own distinct paths. Who gave you this? I said as I grabbed the manila folder. My head was now in violent pain. She was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and old-fashioned clothing. It seemed almost Amish how out of place she was to the rest of the diner. "You did," she said. "You gave me your number, you told me exactly what to say on the phone to get you here, and you also said that you would run out of time before you could do it, so now you have to. And you believed me? Why not? You seemed less crazy than the cult that I was in. So what are you going to do?" "Nothing, there is nothing I can do. The part of me that gave you this task is also the part of me that never accepted that. So, which part are you? The part that wants to forget any of it ever happened. Do you still resent your wife?" The shrink asked as he closed his notepad, and I could feel the end of our session coming. I think there used to be a part of me that did. But it broke off to do its own thing. There also used to be a part that wanted her back, but it got tired of waiting. I found her. After years of searching, I found her in this one little shitty apartment an hour away from our house. Living it up alone. I followed her in, and as soon as she opened the door to the apartment, I busted in. "This is everything I had ever wanted." The words jumped out before I even had the chance to speak them. "Why did you leave? Why did you leave me there alone to suffer?" She scurried into a corner of the room, and I managed to pull out my gun. She grabbed both her legs and held them in a tight embrace. "I'm sorry, Adam, I needed better, I wanted better. I wanted to be happy. I wanted the version of you that saw life and potential. That saw a future, that saw good. The only thing you ever saw was death. The only thing you ever focused on. Why couldn't you reconcile your own inner hatred? Why couldn't you reconcile it with yourself? I just needed you to love me. I did, Adam, but it was never enough. I felt myself crumble under the weight of it all. Pain and hatred. I could try to reason with it all, but it was all consuming. It was who I had become, it was my only purpose. Why couldn't you save me? Why couldn't you take this pain away? Why couldn't you love me more than I hated myself? And then I pulled the trigger, all the sound left me, it was all blank. I don't think I ever thought about what it would mean to live with this after. So now I had no one to direct this toward but myself. As I knelt down to look at the horror of what I had done, I wondered if I could wash it away. If my life would be penance for the stain I had committed against myself. Or if, even after, this moment would always follow me, an unhealing, festering wound.